Well, hello, and welcome to this month's Human Capital Watch webcast. I am particularly pleased to be here as part of the Conference Board's continuing effort to bring you great research and insights that are actionable. And I'm very, very pleased to have with me today one of the researchers from the Human Capital team, Amanda Popela, who is one of the co-authors on the piece of research we're going to be talking about. So welcome, thank you for joining me today. Well, we're going to take a look at a variety of things, and as you can see here, we're really trying to take a look at this particular report. I think Amanda has a copy for you, which of course is available for all of you as member organizations. And we're going to take a look at the impact of digital transformation and what's that doing to organizations, how does that impact human capital functions, and how does that support or not support the ongoing development of leaders. We're also going to talk about demographic shifts in terms of generations and some of the challenges that presents. And we're also going to take a look at the perceptions of HR practitioners. And so we're very, very pleased to share with you the 2018 Global Leadership Forecast. It's a brand new report, and it's done in cooperation with DDI and EY, and we're thrilled to share it with you. Just before we start, though, let me just give you a few housekeeping kinds of things. We hope that you'll ask questions throughout the webcast. You can use the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You certainly can download the presentation and also the report online as a member organization. You can watch the video or the PowerPoint on a full-screen basis by clicking the 4 arrows at the top right of the screen. And at the end, we're going to ask you to take a very, very brief evaluation. It's only a couple of questions, but we take it very seriously, and we'd love your feedback. We'd like to know how you found the webcast today useful and what we can do to be more effective in the future. And finally, this will be available on demand within about 48 hours, and we would ask you to share this with colleagues who perhaps were unable to join you today. One thing I would mention is that this, like so many of our webcasts, is available for continuing education credits. You can see here that if you want CPE credits, you do need to remain upright and alert in the chair, because at 3 different intervals they will ask you to do something. You'll need to respond in order for you to qualify for CPE credits. We don't have a slide on it this time, but we always offer recertification credits for SHRM and for HRCI. Please be sure to request that as well by providing your full name and email address in the space that's and I see many of you have already done that. So this is it's a very advanced crowd, so it's beautiful. So let me, without further delay, pass this to my colleague Amanda, who kind of set the tone for us and tell you a little bit about the background of this study. So, Amanda?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca. And I do have the report here. It's available for download. I think you all have access on the bottom of the screen. The report actually contains 25 research insights. Today we're going to cover 10 of them. And we're really looking at, Rebecca, you mentioned many of them, looking at digital and digital leadership. We're looking at coaching and mentoring and some of the ways that leaders want to learn. We're looking at some of the demographic changes, so millennials, Gen X, females in leadership, women rising into leadership positions, and then we'll focus on HR and what HR can do to help their leaders develop. So this is some of the background of the study. We have 25,000 leaders that participated. 2,500 HR professionals in almost 2,500 organizations. And you can see some of the demographics here. It really represents the demographics in the workplace. So you can see, 31% leaders in our study were female. That mirrors the female leaders in the workforce. So many of these demographics are mirroring what we're seeing in the workplace.
Well, just the sheer size of the respondents makes this just such a rich database to work with, and so many insights that can be pulled simply because it is so comprehensive and it is so widespread.
Absolutely, and this is actually our largest study yet.
Yes.
So we've been doing this DDI has been doing this for over a decade, and this is the most respondents we've ever had.
So we did partner with DDI in 2014, 2015, and again this year, and with our new partners EY, so very exciting times.
Yep, so I think these are the 10 findings that we're going to focus on today, and I think we're ready to get started.
Great. So the report is really captured in about 6 different core areas. And the first one is a couple of highlights that I want to share from what we're calling leaders at the core. So it's an opportunity to sort of step back a little bit and take a look at leadership development and sort of where we think things are. So one of the things we did in this study, as we do in a companion study here at the Conference Board on the CEO and now C-Suite Challenge, we ask CEOs or C-Suite leaders, in this case leaders, what they thought about the top challenges that they had in the leadership development area. And they could think not just leadership development, but also around cyber terrorism and global recession and geopolitical uncertainty, and there were about 20 some odd things they could have picked from. And lo and behold, the top 2 were about developing the next generation of leaders and the failure to attract and retain talent. So you can see that those were the top 2 in this study, and it parallels very much what we've found in the last few years, where those 2 options are uppermost in the minds of CEOs and C-suite leaders. No different here. I think what's really important here is when we ask these leaders and we ask them about the overall quality of their leadership development programs, only 41% believed that their leadership development programs at their organizations, these are the leaders now, said that it was high or very high in quality, only 41%. Only 64% of them rated themselves effectively, highly effective or very highly effective in identifying and developing future talent. So I want to repeat that. 64% of the leaders themselves rated themselves to be highly or very highly effective in developing and identifying talent, which means that you have 46% of those who don't feel that they can do a good job. And yet this is a top finding in terms of what's on the minds of these leaders. You know, when you think about the HR professionals and how they look at leadership development programs, it's rather sobering. 52% of them cannot tell you, and with any degree of confidence, what the quality of their overall leadership cadre is at any particular time. 31% said there was a weak or non-existent relationship between the work they're doing in leadership development and the business strategy. And you see this disconnect across the board. 55% said that they didn't feel that their processes were integrated. 78% said that their career planning process was only effective or moderately effective. 48% said that they don't use information from assessments or from performance data to determine how they will progress these leaders. And 35% said there's no program to develop high potentials. And then 45% said they don't measure it, even if they have it. So I think that's rather telling that both leaders and HR leaders have a rather jaded view of how effective some of these core leadership development processes are. So what do? First thing I think is that you do a candid assessment, and then you plan to close gaps. But you also have to build stakeholders. This cannot be done alone. This is not, leadership development is not the purview of the HR department. It is the purview of every leader at that organization who's responsible collectively for bringing leaders along. It's also, I think, an opportunity to align. If your leadership development strategy doesn't align with the business strategy, what is the point? At the end of the day, under the best of circumstances, leadership development is future casting, if you will. You have to make a decision as to what you think the organization will need in the future. And if you're slightly off and you are developing people toward that vision, but you're off, you're going to have a group of people who are exquisitely prepared for a future that doesn't arrive. And so that's why I think it's so important to align leadership development with the business strategy. Another finding that I'll share with you is about the relative level of engagement among these leaders. So there's some positive things here. You know, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, 98% of them felt accountable for being a leader for their employees. They're engaged in their role as a leader. They find their job to be full of meaning and purpose. They're committed. They don't intend to leave the organization in the next 3 months. And they look for opportunities to develop their employees. That is all great stuff. High scores. These are leaders reporting on their own level of engagement. Here's what they also said. They said that they didn't have a written, up-to-date development plan. 56%. Most of them are very concerned about a variety of other things. 42% said they didn't feel that they were advancing at an acceptable rate, and particularly among leaders who are earlier in career, that's a real red flag, or should be. 36% thought they learned more from their employees than their managers. And you can see that it continues on and on. 27% don't believe that they understand the career path for themselves as a leader in the organization. You know, disengagement is infectious, and you have to make sure that leaders themselves are engaged so that they can inspire and engage their employees. We do a lot of work on the leadership development end of the spectrum here at the Conference Board, and Amanda was my co-partner in co-author on a Millennial leadership program, and I think this sort of reflects what we found in that one as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, only 35% of HR leaders believe that leaders have high quality development plans. You can't expect people to develop other leaders if they haven't felt as though they've been the recipient of leadership development support, and if they haven't had a mentor. We'll come to that a little bit later in the broadcast. Amanda, do you want to take us through some of the digital and data findings?
Absolutely. So the next finding is on digital and data. And as you mentioned, Rebecca, in the future casting, the role of leaders, we hear this from a lot of our members, that how do you prepare leaders for a role that doesn't exist, or to use a technology that doesn't exist? And this is something that companies are struggling with, and it's something that is on top of mind for a lot of leaders. So we reference a report in this study that 2 billion jobs will be affected by artificial intelligence and robotics in the next decade. And so some are disappearing, you know, drivers, construction, mining, you know, we think a lot of those jobs are disappearing, and others are created, and we don't know what those jobs will be yet. So how are companies dealing with this? First, so this next slide shows financial data. So this is the financial performance of what we call digital pioneers versus digital laggards. Digital pioneers are the companies whose leaders are most prepared to operate in a digital environment, and digital laggards are the opposite, the least prepared. So we see, you know, the performance, 50% higher financial performance for digital pioneers than the average, and 28% lower financial performance for the digital laggards. And it's not just about the financial performance. This next slide shows some of the other things that these companies are better at. So the digital pioneers, you know, they have leaders that can act decisively, who are maintaining effectiveness despite lack of predictability, are navigating through complexity. So a lot of these things are about leading in a new world of work, whether it's digital or just keeping up with the pace of change. One other interesting finding with these digital pioneers is they have a learning culture. So their leaders are more likely to want to take on stretch assignments. They're more likely to seek input from their peers and their employees, more likely to provide input into their organization. So they're really, you know, all about learning and having experiential learning experiences in the organization. They have more engaged leaders. They're more innovative. So there's a lot of benefits to having a digital pioneer organization. So, you know, one thing what companies can do is to reevaluate competency models to focus on these emerging skills. You know, a lot of the adapting to change, the digital skills, and keeping the organization kind of up to date and current on many of those skills.
You know, it occurs to me, it's partly the digital world that they inhabit. And I don't know that any industry is safe from this transformation. But it's also about how you lead. And not only leading in this environment, but how do you leverage the new tools, the new way of work, new types of workers, new approaches to getting work done. And I don't know that a lot of organizations have sort of cracked the code on that just yet.
I would agree. We also found, you know, of the Fortune 500 companies that were around in 2006, half of them have disappeared. So companies aren't all able to keep up with that pace of change.
And yet some of their products and services have sort of been adopted or adapted or absorbed by someone else, but the companies themselves have gone. It's interesting.
Exactly. Yep.
Interesting concept.
Yeah. I know we're going to talk about HR later, but an interesting finding here is also that HR leaders were among the least prepared. So only 16% of HR leaders felt that they were ready to lead in a digital environment, compared to 37% of the total leadership population. So I know that's something we'll probably touch on a little bit later, but
yeah, I think it's sometimes a case of the cobbler's children. You know, I think a lot of HR professionals are very focused on bringing other populations along, and yet HR is at risk if they don't continue to develop those skills so that they can, continue to be that good partner. So.
Yeah, so they can lead the culture of digital change. Yep. The next finding is on growth and potential. So we're going to focus on high potential talent in this section. We did find, I think, Rebecca, you mentioned that 65% of organizations do identify high potentials. Of those 65%, 60% let the high potentials know that they have this special status. So it's the majority of organizations, but not all organizations. Those that do identify high potentials are seeing benefits for their bench strength, their leadership development, their pipeline. And the leaders that are identified and that know that they're high potential, they're more engaged, they're more likely to actively participate in their own growth and development. And there's lower turnover, so those leaders are likely to stay on board longer.
There's an insight to that too. First of all, being a high potential is sort of a snapshot in time. It's not as though you've been tattooed and now we're done, right? But there's also an expectation that's raised. So if an organization is not prepared to move people along or to make the kinds of career moves or opportunities available that a high potential believes he or she has a right to expect, you get that disconnect sometimes. And so you have to be, if you're going to say that you're now special for whatever reason, at least at the snapshot point in time, then you need to come across with what needs to get done. So.
Well, and we also found 61% of high potentials are successful in their next role. So I think that speaks to, and not all of them are successful. And do you tell them ahead of time, because it might not be forever. But we are also finding some positives. The high potential pool, there are more women. So about a quarter of high potentials are now women. That is actually an increase, even though it's not quite where we'd want it to be. And the high potential pool in general is growing. So organizations, on average, about 32% of their employees are high potential. This is more than in the past, and we're not yet seeing a downside to increasing that pool.
There's always a higher percentage of self-rated high potential designation
yes.
than there is
I think that's
by
something
the
that
HR folks. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So their mother told them they were a high potential.
So this next slide, we're showing the differences between what organizations are providing in terms of leadership development versus what high potentials are desiring. There's some good things here, and there's a little bit of a disconnect. So organizations are providing more learning by books and articles than high potentials would desire. That's not just high potentials. I think all employees, that's a little bit lower on their list. And then the other one is coaching from external mentors. So we're going to talk about coaching and mentoring in a minute, but this is something that high potentials are looking for, and something that organizations should consider. If you're looking to grow your high potentials, this is what they're looking for. One good finding here was the formal workshops and training. So this is something that organizations are providing a lot of. High potentials actually go through more formal training than any other group of employees, and this is something that they are looking for. So it was a good finding there. Of all the desired leadership development types on the high potential side, most of them are personalized, tailored programs. So coaching by current managers, coaching by external mentors, and also the development. So short-term developmental assignments. These could be things like a short, stretch assignment or a short-term project. Long-term assignments could be international assignment. We are finding that about 34% of high potentials have undergone an international assignment, something that they're looking for. So this next slide, so this is the HR professionals and their assessment of their high potential program. So of the 65% that offer these programs, there's some work to be done. So about a quarter of organizations are saying that their programs are not unbiased. Even more organizations are saying that it's not consistent across the organization. And only 57% measure their high potential program. So like I mentioned earlier, 60% of high potentials succeed in their next job. So there is some room for growth. So if we're measuring these programs, we have better systems to capture these, then we could hopefully improve that number.
Absolutely, because these are, as you say, customized experience for the most part. And sometimes they look like job rotations or international assignments, or at least away from the home office, wherever the home office may well be. And I think, that's not a quick undertaking. There's certainly impact to the business potentially. There's the cost associated with that. There's the disruption in the business unit.
Yep.
And so to not have an opportunity to have that be successful much more often than not, I think we're on a path here, but there's certainly room to grow.
Yep.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the next group of findings. And it says cultural drivers, and there's quite a few there that certainly relate to the building of a culture. I'm going to touch on two. I'm going to talk a little bit about mentoring and coaching, and just sort of what we found. So let's take a look for a moment on mentoring. So you can see here from the talking head bubbles that there are benefits to mentoring, and it's a relatively impressive group of stats in terms of what we found in this study. I think there's a couple of takeaways for us. We know that it helps with bench strength. We know that it can have an impact on reducing turnover, and we know that these companies, because they are using mentoring options, can do a better job of data capture and in retaining organizational knowledge. Yet a third or less of the organizations we surveyed, and of close to 2,500 organizations, only about a third have a formal mentoring program. Now, I recognize that there may be some philosophical differences between matching people with a mentor, sort of mentor-mentee mentality. There are others who simply provide training for those who want to be mentors, an understanding of what it means to be a good mentee and what a good mentoring relationship looks like, and then put people in situations where they can find each other and sort of have that sort of naturally evolve. I recognize that the argument on both sides, but one way or the other, to approach mentoring with an opportunity for people to share, whether they are later in career or earlier in career, depending on the topic, and taking a look at mentoring in different ways. There's a correlation between mentoring programs and financial success. What's sobering here is that leaders indicated that only 1 in 6 had had a mentor during his or her career. So what companies can do here certainly is to provide mentors at an earlier stage in someone's career trajectory as a leader. Millennials tend to have more mentors than do those of the Generation X or Baby Boomer generation. Now, I'll grant you that some of that may be a natural drop-off from generational curves, but women tend to have more mentoring as well. Many of these organizations will look at mentoring programs for some specific groups, and it's not always as effective to put people, let's say, in a leadership development program just for women or just for millennials. When we did the millennial leadership research, what we found, and that was also, by the way, in partnership with DDI, what we found was that in many of the top organizations that we studied, they have a program earlier in career, but generally then they sort of coalesce around a single leadership program. Many of us in the interviews we did with CEOs and their C-suite teams was that they are not looking to build women leaders, they were looking to build leaders. Or they're not looking to build millennial leaders as much as they are looking to build leaders here at fill in the blank. I think senior leaders, never having had a mentor in many cases, in 5 out of 6 of those situations, it's going to be difficult for them to be a good mentor without the support of an organization, because if you haven't experienced a good mentor in your own leadership journey and you don't know what that looks like and you can't emulate that, it's very difficult to expect someone to all of a sudden spring into action with those skills to mentor effectively someone else. So the organization really does need to step in. So I think one of the things that organizations should do first is take a look at, do you have a cadre of outstanding leaders that you would like to mentor others? And then can you build a formal program? Can you put these networks in place? And can you see mentoring as a worthy endeavor and investment, because it will radically improve your retention rates, particularly among those who are earlier in career and for whom career development and the chance to be connected is one of the main things you might have in a competitive labor market situation. So mentoring came up as a very important piece of the puzzle. Also, we found, and it reflects much of the work we do in other research reports as well, is building a coaching culture. Now, We did the Millennial Leadership Study that talked a lot about millennials who want coaching from just about anyone, from peers, from internal folks, from external folks, from groups, could be informal, could be formal, but that continual feedback in order to continually enhance a skill set was highly desired. So a lot of organizations are trying to look to help leaders themselves be good coaches, so that as part of their regular managerial responsibilities, they can be a good coach, and they need help. And it doesn't have to be extensive. Some of the best coaching programs I've seen are relatively quick and relatively simple. It's, what went well, what didn't go well, and how can I help you be fabulous, or some other way to describe that, but pretty much that's what it is. And if you can help managers to continually have those conversations and actually care about the responses you're going to get from an employee, you are halfway home. And that's part of building that coaching culture. But a lot of organizations are looking at informal coaches. You've got probably some really talented people in your organization. They're good listeners, they're good observers of human behavior, and they're very connected in terms of helping someone put together some steps to help them address one thing or another. And some people, I think, would find it a tremendous professional step forward if they could add informal coaching to their remit. Certainly organizations need to take a look at custom coaching solutions, particularly for those who have special challenges with particular areas, high potentials, certainly those who perhaps are earlier in career and need maybe a little bit more support to be a good manager. Because remember, those early experiences as a manager sets the tone for all that comes after that. The other thing I would suggest companies take a really good look at is the use of analytics. In virtually all of the findings here, those HR shops with higher levels of analytics skills tend to be much more thoughtful and impactful in the work that they do across the board. And that's because they have data that can help people make more informed and more accurate predictions of future success. So looking at the analytics end of the spectrum is critical across the board, but particularly as it starts to look at some of the things that are perhaps a little less tangible, like coaching and mentoring, and how do you articulate what the impact is. And finally, I think you need to build informal coach networks where people can find, whether it's group coaching or among peers or informal settings, where people can get coaching and skill and feedback on a perpetual basis. And those things are pretty important to having an overall success rate in a coaching program.
I think another important factor here, we're seeing more virtual teams. And we saw in the Millennial Leadership Report that millennials want the face-to-face connection with their coaches, with their managers. And sometimes that's not possible. So in today's environment, leaders are going to have to learn to lead a virtual team. That's something we'll see a little bit later that was lower on the list of effectiveness.
Well, coaching virtually is going to have to be right along there with everything else you do as a manager. But there is no end to the number of startups that are, coach on demand kinds of things. Yep. So that's the wave of the future too. But imagine if someone who needs help or would appreciate some feedback or could benefit from coaching doesn't have to go and download an app somewhere. They can go talk to their own manager and get some in the moment coaching that's in the context of the business environment, which is not something you're going to get with Coach on Demand.
So this next section, we're talking about leader diversity. We're going to focus on a couple areas, the generational diversity and then gender diversity. So this next slide, this looks at the three generations that are currently in the workplace, millennials, Generation X, and baby boomers. And these are the challenges that they face in the workplace and how successful they are at meeting these challenges. These are just the rankings, so you'll see, kind of rising towards the top for all generations are some of the same challenges that they feel like they're meeting well. So these are things like anticipating and reacting to the nature and speed of change, and understanding customer needs. These rise towards the top. Leaders feel that they're doing a pretty good job at these. Towards the bottom, for all generations, are digital business, leading in a digital business environment, and the organizational knowledge and capturing the knowledge. We know that as baby boomers are leaving the workplace, capturing organizational knowledge is going to be an important factor for organizations. That is something that is highly focused on by these leaders. But we were a little bit surprised about the digital business environment. I kind of expected millennials to be a little bit higher in that. And we're finding that they're really not feeling much more comfortable than other generations in leading in a digital environment. The next slide will actually show some of the numbers here. And this is basically telling us millennials are not any more comfortable than any other generation. So digital literacy, leading with digitization, leading virtual teams, millennials are just right where everyone else is. And so I think a key takeaway here is to improve the technology skills of all of your leaders. Don't expect your millennials to come in knowing these things, even though they are digital natives, they grew up with technology. They need the help, the training.
You know, I think that's a point well taken. I mean, when you look at leading virtual teams and set aside the overlay of digitization, so you have baby boomers and Gen X leaders who've been leading virtual teams for a little bit longer. And so maybe they can help there. Maybe some of the digital literacy skills, you know, there could be some opportunities to help a lot of folks, to your point, learn, you know, wherever they need to go to close some of those gaps.
Yeah, I think so. Another something that I should mention is millennials were lower in many of these skills. So you can see, you know, the digital literacy, they're right there, but a lot of the other skills, you know, the customer, you know, anticipating the pace of change, a lot of these skills that are even higher ranked for millennials, they were a little bit less comfortable than the other generations. So this is just where they are in their life, you know, just not having been leaders for as long.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the fourth one, it says maintaining effectiveness despite consistent surprises and a lack of predictability. So you have boomers who are, you know, they've seen the show and they know how the film ends.
Yep.
So I do think there's something to be said for, you know, these are all of us, whatever generation we're in. When you're early in career, these are the things you struggle with. And one of them is ambiguity and having the faith in yourself to make a decent decision, even when some of this is new, unseen, whatever. So I think there's some interesting findings here in that there are skills that all of the leaders, depending on, regardless of which generation, need to address.
Yep, absolutely. And to your point, the same thing if you see at the very bottom for millennials and Gen X is acting decisively without having clear direction. Baby boomers feel a little bit more comfortable with that.
Yeah, but not all that much. So.
The next slide is on Generation X, and we actually call this generation the middle child of the generations in the workforce because if you look at the bottom left-hand graphic, they're receiving the fewest number of promotions. So we have baby boomers who are staying in the workplace longer, millennials who are coming in eager and are getting promoted quickly, and then, you know, we have Gen X in the middle. And we did want to make sure that that we looked at this generation because they are going to be taking on a lot of these senior leadership roles if they're not already. And they are feeling pretty confident in a lot of the skills that millennials are not quite ready for. And even in the digital skills, they're right there with the millennials. So important to look at this generation. And the one major difference that we found with Gen X was around external. They're looking at external coaching. They want externally developed leadership development training. So they are not looking internal to the organization as often as the other generations are.
You know, I think this is very telling. You know, the boomers were at the time the largest generation, but they're outstripped by millennials, and there's the little middle child in there. And yet these are some of the most seasoned performers, and this is the generation that probably didn't advance as much because the boomers did not leave on schedule. Yes. So
they're loyal. So
they're absolutely loyal. And in fact, if we're not careful, their engagement levels could suffer if they continually see people leapfrogging them now,
absolutely.
Having been loyal, faithful,
Yep.
hardworking, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yep. They're not looking to leave, but yeah, you're right. As they see, you know, these millennials coming in, taking over the spots. Something to be aware of, be careful of. Okay, moving on. This is women in organizations. So we did find that only 30% of leaders are women This is an improvement over the last time we did this report in 2014, but it's not a great improvement. And you can see as leaders advance in the organization, it's even lower. So senior leaders, only about 22% are women. But the organizations, we call them diversity pioneers. So organizations that have more women in the organization are finding these, this is the flower graphic, the financial growth, they're finding cultural growth culture, and there you have greater bench strength. So, you know, some other things that these diversity pioneer organizations are seeing in their organization is that their leaders are more collaborative, are working together, they're more innovative, they bring together different mindsets, multiple perspectives, and they focus on personal development and growth more than some of the other organizations in our study.
You know, you see the same thing with financial success in terms of the greater numbers of percentage of women on boards as well, and more diverse boards tend to be found at the organizations that have much greater financial success. So I think, you know, we found very much what we have been seeing in most of the organizations around the world, and that is the diminished number of women as they move through the leadership ranks. I do think that there are some companies who've done an excellent job of trying to not only just sort of factor that into their process, but making sure that the developmental opportunities that keep someone on a faster track to keep moving through increasing levels of responsibility, that they are finding creative ways to make sure that that can continue to happen so that there isn't a penalty for being a woman. So
absolutely. We did find, I think we've mentioned it, but the mentoring was a critical experience for women in senior leadership roles. More women in the senior leadership roles had a mentor even than men in those same roles. We're also finding focusing on well-being, focusing on career development, performance evaluation measurement, and using data for hiring and promotions are all things that are helpful in getting more women into senior leadership roles.
Absolutely, and I think that sort of gender and demographic blindness in terms of looking at the data allows you to cast a wider net and a deeper net to identify folks who might not have come up under other screening processes, and I think that's critical to do. It works in orchestras, it should work in an organization as well. So.
Yes.
Well, anything on this slide before we move to?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Ready for the next topic?
Great. So let's talk a little bit about HR, and HR has an opportunity. So a couple of years ago, in the earlier version of this that we were involved in, we asked both leaders and HR leaders to talk about themselves in terms of how they saw themselves. And I'm going to show you a slide, and it talks. I'm going to have to explain it because it's a graphic that I've come to love, but it does take just a moment to sort of wrap your head around. So we've asked them whether or not they thought of themselves as reactors, you know, those people who are perhaps more policy compliance oriented. If they saw themselves as partners who perceived gaps and looked to fill them and, you know, make sure folks were in chairs. And then the third one was, did they see themselves as an anticipator? In other words, folks who use analytics to forecast, that it's closely linked to the business. And so those were the three categories rather, okay? So in this next slide, I'll just take a moment, let this wash over you like a gentle breeze. There's both HR leader ratings and leader ratings for the last time we did this in 2014 and the current time. So if we just focus for a moment on the orange, the left side of this graphic, you can see that the numbers have not moved very much. HR leaders pretty much think they are still largely partners, but many, 17% in this last edition, see themselves as anticipators. So they think they've pretty much kept pace. Maybe not quite the progress they might have liked in moving through this pipeline to get all the way to anticipator, but at least they're sort of holding steady. If, however, you look at the leader ratings from 2014 to 2015, you can see that they've lost some ground in the perception of leaders, that the HR function is seen less as an anticipator and more of a partner and as a reactor. And so what this tells us is that the way in which HR functions are perceived by leaders does not match up with what HR folks themselves may believe they are making as a contribution. And I think part of this is, as we've touched on earlier, is that they are not investing in themselves to quite the same extent, and that they perhaps are going to miss this digitization trend and will become even more and more unable to catch up. So let's take a look at what this actually means. So remember now, the anticipator is the one that uses analytics to not only forecast the business, but is also very aligned with the business strategy. And the bottom line here is that these anticipators, those who identify themselves as anticipators and also looking at the publicly available data on financial performance, we can see that they are 2 times more likely to link talent planning to strategic planning. Again, that tight linkage. They're more likely to invest in the development of leaders and in the digitization capabilities of their own group. They use analytics to a much greater degree. They are much more likely to have high potential programs, to use assessments, and all of that's reliant on the ability to take a look at data and to glean insights from it. So what to do? The first thing is to sort of assess where you are on the journey. And there are an awful lot of people who will talk about their digital prowess, and when you peel some of that back, it's a little bit less advanced than perhaps they would like you to think. A little bit like analytics. Many people can spell it, but not necessarily have the robust analytics function that they would like. You've got to make a plan to move from partner all the way to the anticipator role, and thinking about what are the skill gaps. Now, maybe that looks like assessing all of your human resources folks, figuring out what your strengths are, thinking about the ways in which you can support them to close that gap, whether that looks like certifications, it looks like training programs, whatever that path is, you've got to have a plan. You've got to upskill these folks, and if they can't make that transition in this age of digital transformation, this may be someone that can no longer really function in that role. If they can't be a true business partner, at minimum, to leaders, you're going to have to grow the analytic capability, not just in this specific instance, but I think across the board. And also, HR leaders are going to have to take a piece of the accountability for business transformation and what their role is in that. And some of that starts to look like being just as comfortable with the technology that others are using, and using that as a way to drive analytics decisions. A lot of pressure for HR functions. This is an eye chart as well. But you can see here that there's a variety of things we asked HR leaders. Do you feel that the pressure on you has decreased or stayed the same or increased? I want to draw your attention to the larger font numbers in the green arrow. There are 4 areas in which they feel increased pressure to embrace new HR technology, to use analytics or data skills, to enhance their reputation with senior team as a trusted advisor, i.e. anticipator, and their own job engagement. I think that engagement one is very telling. If HR professionals do not feel as though they themselves have the support they need to continue to grow and to be a respected piece of the overall success pattern of the organization, that they don't have a chance, they're so pressured to do the tactical things that they don't get a chance to develop their people or to think strategically. Engagement's going to suffer, and that's a concern. The function of the HR professional is incredible, and we have to support that, and so I don't want to lose that piece out of the mix. It is about developing leaders, but it's also about supporting the HR function. So a couple of things. HR leaders, we asked them, how prepared are you? And notice the difference here. Now we're comparing HR leaders with leaders. And at the bottom here, these are the areas in which HR leaders themselves feel that they don't have the level of skill and comfort that they would want. And you can take the bottom 3, that they aren't able to anticipate or react to high-speed change, use data to guide business decisions, or to operate in a highly digital environment. So these are the same things we've seen several times in response to several different questions. So how do we fix this? Well, first of all, you've got to have a candid look at what your team looks like, and you've got to figure out how to build your own digitization skills. And that might mean that you have as mentors a lot of the business line folks who come in and help train your people, and also to think about what are the best practice companies that you could embed some of your folks in, or have them be exposed to what really good looks like, and help build the HR team of the future. we had one question that came in a little bit ago about some of the organizations that are doing some of these things very well. We don't have a lot of time today to go through much of that, but in many of our other reports, for example, we just had one on strategic HR and the 21st century. We have one on employee engagement, who's doing great things in terms of engaging employees or leaders. We have a whole series on digital transformation. So there's a variety of companies that are profiled there, and would encourage you to take a look at those. Those are the stories we're authorized to tell as part of our case studies. So perhaps that will be of value to you as well. So Amanda, this has been a sort of a breathtaking walk through some of the findings, and we only got to about 10 of them, 10 or 11 of them. There's 25 in the report, and I hope you'll spend some time. And what I like about this report is that for each of the 25 findings, it's two facing pages. It's sort of, here's what we found, and then here's what it means, and here's what you might do about it. Sort of a what, so what, and now what kind of a format, which as a former practitioner myself, I find relatively helpful. So it's sort of like, yes, I'm already anxious and concerned about this. Now tell me what I do about it. So that's what we hope you'll take away from this report when you have an opportunity to read it. But something that maybe we should touch on that we haven't covered today, anything that strikes you about the report?
I don't think so. So there are, like you said, many other areas in this report. We talk about teams, purpose of an organization. We have a lot of different areas, a little bit more into the financial performance data. So definitely, take a look. It's a great report.
Well, that is one of the good things in this report, I think, also, is that it ties it back to financial performance. Yeah. So when we're looking for a rationale for doing this, we all want great leaders, and we all want engaged employees and all those things. But a lot of times the data speaks volumes, and the ability to take a look at companies who do well with these things and their financial performance is a great place to try to convince others to come along with you on this journey. Absolutely. Amanda, do you want to tell us about an upcoming webcast that you're intimately involved in?
Absolutely. So next month, I will be here with two practitioners speaking about a report that's actually going to be released next week. I think next Wednesday, this report, Moments That Matter Throughout the Employee Life Cycle. This is a report that came out of the Engagement Institute at the Conference Board. We are very excited about it. We've been working on it for the past year. And I'll be joined by Jamie and Chris, and they'll be speaking about some of the moments that matter to their employees and how they, as HR practitioners, work with their employees to make sure that all of their leaders, their high potentials, their millennials, all these groups of leaders are getting the experiences that they need. So
that's great. Well, congratulations on the impending drop of the report. We've also partnered with the Mayo Clinic and DTE Energy on a couple of other occasions, and for example, at the Mayo Clinic, spotlighted some of their succession planning processes, which is just this side of extraordinary. And DTE Energy has some really wonderful things that they're doing in the engagement space, so it should be a good webcast. So in the closing moments, I'll just direct your attention to a couple of other things that are available to you as members of the conference board, and we really want to try to provide the kind of content and insights that are relevant to you. We take your choice to be a member of the conference board very seriously, and we appreciate that very much. So a couple of things. We have talked about the C-Suite Challenge. I've mentioned that. That's our flagship report. I think we do that every year. It's fascinating to see the changes. This year we went from just the CEO to the C-Suite, so we have a fuller, perhaps more robust look at this. We have some captures of insights from a recent leadership conference about women's leadership. And I especially want to point out this webcast that's coming out on March 20th. If you visit our website, there's actually a series of webcasts that we're doing on stopping dysfunctional and abusive behavior in the workplace. I know that the headlines are everywhere. You can't escape this, from the Me Too movement here in the United States to other similar movements around the world. There is no end to the number of people who are very concerned, and rightly so, about making sure that the workplace remains the kind of productive environment for all people. And so we have a series of 3 webcasts. The first one is March 5th, and it really talks about the frame of the issue and why this is so critically important. Hosting that will be our TCB President and CEO, John Spector, and he'll be joined by Stephen Paskoff, who is the former EEOC attorney, but a man who has spent decades in talking to C-suite leaders around how they can build respectful civil workplaces. We'll follow that on March 6th with a webcast from our partners at the Governance Center, and they're going to talk about the board's role in and responsibility in addressing this, and what should the board do, and how can a board think about preempting these things even before they are faced with a crisis situation ripped from the headlines. And then on March 20th, as you see, I'll be hosting a webcast that talks specifically about what leaders, there'll be a head of D&I and a couple of other functional leaders who will talk about the ways in which their organization is embracing this. It is a complimentary series. It'll be both members and also the public. I would encourage you to register for the whole series as quickly as you can to ensure a seat. But we are very pleased to be at the forefront of this conversation and hope that it will be of help to you as you think through and hear about some of the ways in which some organizations are addressing this successfully. And then finally, the annual Leadership Development Conference, one of my personal favorites. It's where we talk about this research and other things, but I've never gone to this, even when I was a practitioner, and not walked away with a half dozen great things that I could implement back at my organization directly afterwards. So I think that's about all the time we have today. I want to encourage you to complete a very short evaluation. As I mentioned, we do take it very seriously. We would love to hear what your thoughts are. And if you'll be kind enough to spend just a few moments taking that quick survey, we'd appreciate it. If you have feedback that perhaps is best handled by reaching out directly, I hope you'll do that. And I would just encourage you to continue to take a look at the research and insights. Reach out to us and let us know what we should be focused on and help support you. And thank you very much for choosing to be here. And thank you, Amanda, for joining me on this webcast today. Thanks, everybody.